Mara Alvarez, a quietly resilient woman with a past she keeps folded like an old photograph, takes a nervous Saturday to a suburban shooting range to try something for herself. An act of courage small and private. A clique of polished, snobby shooters, led by a swaggering ex-competition champion, deride and bait her. What begins as anonymous humiliation becomes a crucible. Old skill, buried grief, and a single, impossibly precise shot collide. The gunshot that follows is both literal and symbolic, shattering ridicule, reclaiming identity, and opening small, surprising paths to redemption. The tone is cinematic, intimate, and emotionally rich, exploring themes of dignity, resilience, the cost of pride, and the strange permissions we grant ourselves to be brave. Mara Alvarez told herself, over and over in the 2-mile walk from the bus stop to the range, that she was only there to check a box. The list she carried in the back of her head, small, mundane steps toward a life she thought she should lead, had learned to shoot, wedge between, get a new mattress, and fix the leaky faucet. It was a ridiculous item to an older version of herself, the one who had learned to thread a needle in darkness and patch a radiator with tape. But this Mara had started letting the absurd things into the margins. Tiny risks that made the world vibrate in a different, less predictable register. The range's gravel lot smelled of diesel and sun-baked rubber. A wind pushed through the eucalyptus and flattened the newspaper clutched by the board attendant in the booth. Inside, the firing lanes were a humming bevel of fluorescence, oil, sheen on the concrete, the metallic smell of spent brass and gun oil. People came and went like punctuation, some loud, some discreet. For Mara, every detail anchored a nervousness that had nothing to do with bullets. The way the lane dividers clanged when their screw tightened, the unique scraped in names of rifles on pegboards, the taste of copper at the back of her mouth like a small, remembered apology. She registered, filled the waiver with slow, careful letters. The clerk, young, tattoos like tidy sentences, smiled politely, then pointed to the range manager, a man named Sam who had aged as if he existed in 2 different decades at once. He wore a practical vest and a patience that looked like a second skin. First time? Sam asked, voice even not the sort to dramatize any beginner's terror. His eyes were the color of coffee left in the pot too long. Dark, with a late sheen.
Yes,
Mara said. Her voice surprised her. It wasn't the tremor she'd expected. It sounded steadier than the hand that filled the waiver. Sam gave her basic orientation, pointed out the ear protection, the ways the target carriage moved, the lane etiquette. He talked about breathing like someone reciting a hymn. If you're nervous, keep breathing, he said. Start with something small. You don't need to impress anyone here. She nodded and tried to convince herself she cared more about the coffee color in his eyes than the meaning behind the words. Yet there, in the midst of fluorescent light and humming fans, was a possibility she'd forgotten, that she could choose to be small, or she could be quiet and whole and surprising. At the far end of the range, a group gathered like a social barometer. They were a compact constellation of confidence, polished boots, tailored shooting jackets, names stitched in gold on their chests. They joked in quick, proprietary bursts and measured each other in silent challenges. A tall man with a slash of white at his temple and a jaw that favored smugness more than kindness moved like a man used to being watched. His name was Derek Hale. He was once, by the old magazines pinned to the range's corkboard, a champion. His hands were practiced in making the world defer. Derek didn't need to look at Mara twice before he offered a comment meant to be kind only to himself. New shooter. He called with a chuckle that felt like a club. It landed on Mara the way a pebble lands on glass. It rippled. She shifted, adjusting the strap of her bag, folding herself into the kind of posture that had kept her safe through years of other people's opinions.
yes,
She said. First time. The chuckle spread. Derek's friends? Marta, who wore lipstick like a signal flare, and Will, who had the easy grin of someone who'd never learned to be quiet, saw an opportunity. They had a ritual: invite the new, mock the inexperienced, reinforce the hierarchy by shrinking someone gently, like a demonstration in how to keep the group centered. The range was a stage for them. They were more interested in being gods of their small kingdom than in their own aim. "I'll bet she's never even held a real gun," Marta said loud enough for Sam to hear. Her collarbone flashed like a promise. "Probably thinks it's like one of those toy things from a movie." Will snorted and added, "Maybe she'll be lucky," and hit the paper. "We'll take bets." Mara imagined the bets, the money exchanged as currency for entertainment. She noticed she'd wanted, for reasons she didn't recognize, to surprise someone. Maybe herself. But that was a different life, one where she had the luxury of being bold. Now there was just a question, an invitation. Sam came over then, procedural and watchful. "Hey, let's keep this respectful," he said. His voice was a scythe cutting through the noise. He didn't stand with Derek's group, he stood with the rules. Derek lifted one shoulder like a shrug that claimed the moral high ground through charm. "All in good fun, Sam. Fun doesn't humiliate folks," Sam said. "If she wants a demonstration, she gets a demonstration. Otherwise, let the lanes be." Derek's jaw flexed, something like sunlight on steel. "Fine. No bets. But she should try something real, not the little foam targets." Sam turned to Mara. "If you want, I can set you up at lane 9 with a 22. It's lighter, a good place to start." Mara felt both gratitude and the strange heat of wanting to say something braver. She decided on a compromise. "Show me something," she said. She didn't know when her hands remembered. She'd learned to work with her hands young. Fixing a broken watch for her father, threading thread through fabric for a neighbor who couldn't see well. Her fingers learned to obey patience and focus. For a moment, the world narrowed like a camera closing in, and the volunteer of her attention found an axis. Sam explained the grip, the stance. He watched quietly as she followed. She felt ridiculous and intensely concentrated, like a student at a piano for the first time who discovers she knows which notes are the vanishing places. "Just breathe," Sam murmured. "Let the pulse be a metronome." She pulled the 22's bolt back and felt the metallic song of proper weight settle against her palm. She brought the gun up and let the sight slide into her line as if it were a little doorway she'd learned to open. The other shooters murmured, a few glanced with amusement. Derek's lips pursed into something like a smirk. He leaned, showing his teeth, always a spectator to the vulnerable. The thing about people like him was they could never imagine someone else's quiet competence. Mara's first shot left more echo than impact, an initial jolt through the target that slightly favored the left. She adjusted and fired again. For the third, she exhaled slow and long, and the sound of the bullet snapping through the lane seemed to align something. She hit the paper dead center, small, clean, a dot like a punctuation mark. She felt a surprising lightness at the result, a small bloom under the ribs. A few of Derek's group made an involuntary sound, something between a laugh and an intake of air. It was not derision. "Beginner's luck," Derek said, the way a person pronounces a dismissal. "Not luck." Mara said, sharper than she meant. She did not mean it as defiance, she meant it as fact. She could not, in that instant, imagine the old woman who sometimes surfaced in her thoughts, who had not been allowed luck, but who had always been precise. The day blurred into small acts, Pavel demonstrating a long-range bolt action, a father teaching his teenage daughter to respect recoil. Mara returned several times over the following weeks. She paid for additional sessions, learned to dry fire without ammunition, Read manuals like a person studying an old language, practiced breathing drills like someone training a stubborn bird to land. The range became a place she visited the way another woman visited ballet class. Secretly, with a small obsession that fed something inside, she began to notice the way Derek watched. He was a predator of confidence, always measuring where he could find advantage. He liked to keep things hierarchical. It reassured him that the world could be controlled with small displays of force. One weekend, he approached her with the ease of a man delivering a compliment he hadn't earned. "You're getting good," he said. "You should come to our club night. We do practicals. Real shooters." Mara considered the invitation like a glass in her hand, fragile, dangerous, reflective. It was an opportunity to step into a circle where her progress might be measured more rigorously. It was also an entrance into a room of the same people who laughed when she first walked in. "I'm not sure," she said. Derek's smile was an offer and a promise both. "Come watch. See how the pros do it. You might learn things faster." Mara said yes, because she wanted to see how she fit in a place where no one expected her to belong. She wanted to see whether the warmth that had begun to grow like a small stubborn plant under winter would accept the light. Club nights were loud and tidy. They had the rituals of religious orders, protocols, jokes that were rarely funny to outsiders, and a competitive spirit that could be lubricated with drink and vanity. Derek was at his most impressive. Hand steady, smile practiced. He demonstrated a trick shot, a thin metal spinner at 50 meters, the bullet passing through and ringing like a bell. The room applauded as if sound itself blessed his skill. When it was Mara's turn, there was a round of polite skepticism, the low hum of a crowd waiting for a spectacle. She had brought her own pistol this time, a compact that felt like a secret safe in her hand. She set the target at 20 meters, a small steel disc Sam had recommended for honing focus. "Make it quick," Will said. "We've already seen the show." Marta sipped her drink and folded her hands like a queen waiting for the play. Derek leaned against the rail, nodding as if to say, "You will be tested." Mara centered, as she had thousands of times during solitary practice. But something shifted. She could feel an awareness ripple through the crowd, a soft pressure. The thing about being watched was not that it made you perform better. It made you confront the particular theater of your own self. That night, Mara's mind wandered, not to a past of trophies or accolades, but to the small, ordinary reasons she'd started with a list of mundane bravery. A daughter who needed to believe her mother could do things alone, an account with a decent balance to prove to herself that she could make decisions without permission. Each small victory was a read against old wins. Derek's group kept their jokes softer now, as if testing the balance. Someone shouted a jeer, half a joke, half a barb. The disc clanged in the distance like a question. Mara raised her pistol, aligned the sight, and breathed. Her muscles were memory now, trained to react with economy. She squeezed. The recoil whispered up through her wrist, and the disc rang true. Not a near miss, not a smear, but a clear bell-like resonance that made the room draw its breath in the same place. There was a wash of unexpected silence. No one dared to fill it with applause that might strip the moment of its dignity. Derek's smile tightened. He watched the disc spin like a clock. An old familiarity bobbed in his eyes, a hunger to puncture a moment of someone else's light. After the shot, there were congratulations, thin and then more genuine as another member. A woman named Jules, who had once been a competitor and had softened with age, came over. She put a hand on Mara's shoulder, a small, companionable pressure. "Nice shot," Jules said. Her voice carried the vocabulary of someone who knew what it cost to stand in the ring. "Good form," Sam added, humble in his own quiet way. He met Mara's gaze, and for a second it felt like an appraisal that recognized more than technique. Meanwhile, Derek's smirk had settled into the kind of look that said a game had been proposed. He took himself to the corner, started talking about a challenge that would be great for the club's reputation. A distant plate at 100 meters, steel target at a wild, improbable angle. Something to really separate the pros, he announced. He looked at Mara with a predator's curiosity. You should try it. It'll be entertaining. There it was, a dare staged as opportunity. Mara felt the old list throb in her head like a pulse. She could decline and keep the small safety of anonymity. Or she could accept and become, in the span of a few seconds, the spectacle they'd arranged for her. She kept silent and let the room wait. Why? Jules asked, incredulous. Why risk that with a new shooter? That's 100 meters. Derek's answer was a smile, so thin it was almost a blade. Because sometimes the new has something the old forgot, and because the crowd likes a little gamble. The debate sat like heat over the room. Mara listened to the buzzed applause, dissent, encouragement. Her heart pounded, and her fingers found the gun like a rooted tree. She said yes. Not because she wanted Derek's attention, nor to prove him wrong. She said yes because she wanted, in the direction of her small life, to be capable of an act that did not involve anyone's permission. When she accepted, 100 eyes tipped in her direction, curious to see whether a simple woman could pull off something that required a kind of coolness not often found on first tries. They set up the plate. Small, like a coin at 100 meters, the carriage clinking and the wind taking its measurement across the range. The distance made the target insignificant to look at from where she stood, a tiny dark dot in a pale field. Derek stood close by, offering hints as if to feed a script. Ones are variable, he said loudly, not that she needed him. You'll need to account. Watch your mouth, Jules said quietly. She eyed Derek with the suspicion of a person who sees a hyena in a suit. Sam came and offered pragmatic advice. Wind. Elevation. Steady your stance. Don't rush. Mara felt the momentum of the crowd like waves. She set her feet, felt the weight of her boots, remembered the way her father had taught her to steady a ladder against a wall when she was small, the idiom of small things becoming anchors. She breathed, long and flat, focusing not on the noise but on the rhythm. The first shot missed wide to the right. Derek allowed himself a small triumph. The room murmured. Mara blinked and readjusted. She did not think of winning. She thought of aligning. Aligning the sight, aligning the wind's whisper with the tiny iron dot. She let her breath be a pendulum and her finger a tender, unhurried mechanism slipping to the edge. On the third shot, the round finished its arc and met the steel. The sound was different from the 22s she'd practiced with. It carried a low, resonant authority. The plate sang. It was a single ping, mercilessly clear. The sound caught in throats and seemed to draw the air out of the room. No one applauded immediately. Their faces were masks that had nowhere to move. Derek's mouth opened a fraction, then closed. Marta's lipstick seemed to fade. Will's grin fell like a curtain. For a beat, the sound was an accusation rather than an achievement. Mara felt all at once the absurdity of being someone's spectacle and the impossibility that she could be reduced to a single noise. The clang, so clean and inarguable, had the effect of exposing people's expectations as flimsy. The minute it rang, the social scaffolding in the room rearranged. A woman who had been an object of small amusement a week ago now stood with the evidence of her own competence in a place that had underestimated her. But it wasn't the shot alone that silenced the room. It was the way she stood afterward, neither triumphant nor offering, simply present. There was no grand flourish, no hoisted gun or broad grin. Her face had the light of someone who had done what she came to do and had nothing left to prove. That humility, quiet and a little stern, was what made the room change gears. That night, after the applause that came later, polite, then sincere, from Jules and Sam and a few others. Mara stepped out into the cool night with hands that smelled faintly of oil and brass. She walked home under a sky that felt like fabric stretched tight, each star a pinprick of indifference. On the bus, her reflection in the window surprised her. She looked ordinary, hair in a low knot, coat buttoned. Yet inside, a warmth radiated like a small, steady furnace. She had faced a piece of herself she'd been told was too small to matter and had found it whole. Days blurred into new rituals. People who had laughed were quieter, their jokes lacking the sharp edge they used to have. Derek was civil, which for him was an improvement. He came around sometimes to watch her practice, and when he did, he watched with something that wasn't mocking. Something like study. It unsettled him. He had been comfortable cataloging people as demonstrable. Mara refused to be cataloged. One evening, when the range was closing and the last orange light of sunset slanted through the windows, Derek approached her by the cleaning rack. He carried a coffee and wore a face that seemed to have been revised many times. "You're good," he said. It wasn't a compliment wrapped in a barb. It was plain and, to both their surprise, honest. "I didn't expect that from, you know." Mara looked at him and measured whether the conversation was a trap to be navigated. "You didn't expect much from me," she said, and her voice was wry rather than angry. "Is that something you want to discuss?" He shifted his weight. "I guess I had an image of what people like me were supposed to look like." He gestured vaguely to the lanes, the metals pinned like flags on a wall. "And where you fit in that." "And where I didn't," Mara finished. "Right." He paused. "Maybe I'm tired of maintaining the image. It's a lot of armor for a man. You make it look easier." Mara almost laughed. "Because I had nothing to lose." Derek studied her like someone reading a new page. "And what do you have now?" She thought of her daughter's face in photos, the way other people's assumptions had dwindled away like old wallpaper. "A little more room to be myself," she said, "which is an odd thing to aim for. But it's honest." Derek turned the coffee between his hands, a nervous human tic. "If you ever want to practice with someone who's unfiltered." "No," Mara said. And it was not rude. "I have Sam and Jules and my own stubbornness." He nodded, oddly relieved. "Fair. Still. You'll teach me a thing or two about humility." "That's not a lesson I can give," she said. "You'll have to find it. Time has a way of suturing things with small stitches." Word traveled, softened, about the day Mara silenced them with a single shot. It wasn't a legend, it was a corrected narrative. She became a person people referenced when they spoke. An example, not of spectacular overcoming, but of quiet reclamation. Kids at the range would sometimes glance her way, as if seeing a visible proof that people could change their own small, private scripts. But the story wasn't finished being written. One evening, as winter flexed its chill, Mara received a call from a number she recognized by the way it rounded in her head. It was her daughter, Anna. The call started like a chasm and then closed with a new seam. Anna's life had been a tangle of teenage aberrations. Missed calls, borrowed clothes, a stubborn streak that could flatten mountains. They had not spoken in 3 months. "Mom." Anna's voice was raw and young. "I saw you on social." Mara's mind did a quick arithmetic. Social. A man with a camera had snapped her that night. Someone had posted the shot. Mara's hand steady, the disc ringing. The world had casually taken an image and made it the proof of something she hadn't intended to broadcast. "You saw it." Mara said. "I saw." Anna inhaled, sharp. "I'm proud." The words sank into Mara like warm rain. "I missed you?" She heard herself say, and for the first time in months, the truth did not feel like a jagged stone to keep secret. They met on a bench near the park in a place that smelled of sweet grass and cold bread. Anna had the same nose as Mara, a small, determined structure. She hugged Mara like a woman who had been rehearsing trust. "Did you know you were famous?" she joked. Mara looked at her daughter and felt the odd luxury of a moment where the past and future negotiated peace. "No," she said. "But I shot well." Anna laughed and then her eyes went wet. "I'm sorry. I was mad. I thought." She stopped, searching for a reason that wasn't about blame. Mara took her hand and felt the smallness of it. "I told myself I would do little things," she said, "to show you it was okay to be hungry for a life you wanted. I didn't mean for it to be a spectacle." Anna squeezed. "It wasn't." "It was." She hesitated, choosing. "It was brave." The word floated between them. It had weight. In the months that followed, the shooting range became part of a new architecture in Mara's life. It wasn't the main room where everything else happened. It was a back office where she polished a certain craftsmanship of being. She learned to own the thin, fierce boundary between being humble and being invisible. People who had been snobby were kinder, not because they had to be, but because the mechanics of derision had become less satisfying. Derek and Mara found a strange, uneven civility. He respected her because she refused the easy humiliation he offered. Jules, who had once been a competitor with a face like a closed book, became the person Mara confided in on slow afternoons. Sam remained the watchful man who taught her how to breathe in just the right way. One evening, years later, long after the shot that had so altered things, Mara returned to the range for the anniversary of the day she had decided, on a whim, to learn to shoot. She walked past lane 9, where her early, ragged practice had been, and paused to look at the wall. Someone had pinned a photo there. Mara's arm extended, eyes trained, the steel disc in the distance frozen in a moment of pure resonance. The caption beneath, in a handwriting that was not hers, read "For small, brave things." She smiled. The world had given her an echo of itself, an unasked for reverence that did not change her. She had what she had always wanted, a life stitched together by small acts of courage, a daughter beside her sometimes, friends who'd become honest and not ceremonial. She had a room where she could be unshiny and still be respected. And more important, she had a quiet knowledge that the single shot that silenced them had done more than show her aim. It had reminded everyone, including herself, that the most surprising power is the one that arrives when you refuse to be small any longer. The range's fluorescent lights hummed their familiar song. A new shooter, a young man with a trembling hand, sat down at lane 9. Mara watched him load, the way he kept his eyes on the floor like a person practicing shame. She approached, carrying the simple dignity of someone who had once been in his shoes. "Breathe," she said. "Focus on what's in front of you, not what's behind." He looked up, gratitude like a small coin in his expression. She smiled, and in the tiny exchange, the circle of things felt complete. The past didn't have to be a place that trapped her. It could be a map she used to navigate. The snobs, Derek and his old group, no longer had the power to define her. They were characters who had played their parts and learned to be different, or at least quieter. She had reclaimed her life with a series of small, steady acts. The shot that had silenced them had been just a single note in a longer song. One that finished, not with a blaring finale, but with a soft, honest chord of living. The new shooter fired. The sound of the bullet passing through the lane was ordinary. But to Mara, it was another proof that courage is taught in small increments, in the choice to move forward despite the whisper of ridicule. She nodded once at the young man, then went to the counter to sign up for another practice. The world was wide, and she had already learned how to cross it, one small, quiet step at a time.